The Bills are done with them, but nobody else wants them either. 14 former Buffalo Bills stuck in NFL no man's land, and the shocking truth about what happened to this team. Picture this. You just finished an NFL season as one of the most hyped teams in the league. Josh Allen is your quarterback. You have legitimate Super Bowl expectations. The city of Buffalo is buzzing. The Bills Mafia is draped in red, white, and blue. And then the offseason hits, and suddenly, 14 players who suited up for you last year cannot find a single team in the entire National Football League willing to sign them. Not one team. Not one contract. Not even a sniff of serious interest. We are not talking about practice squad bodies and undrafted long shots here. We are talking about guys like Joey Bosa, a 5-time Pro Bowler. We are talking about Matt Milano, one of the better coverage linebackers in the NFL when his body cooperates. We are talking about Tre'Davious White, Shaq Thompson, Brandon Cooks, Jordan Poyer, and a whole roster worth of veterans who are collectively sitting at home watching training camp highlights on their phones, wondering why their phones are not ringing. So what in the world happened? How did an entire defense basically walk out the door and get collectively ghosted by the rest of the NFL? And what does this tell us about who the Buffalo Bills actually were last year? Buckle up, Bills Mafia, because we are about to go deep on every single one of these 14 players. What went wrong, where they could possibly end up, and why this entire situation tells a much bigger and more uncomfortable story about the 2025 Buffalo Bills than most fans want to admit. Let's start with the elephant in the room, or rather the elephant who is now apparently working on his short game at the local golf course. Joey Bosa. The big free agent signing last offseason, who was supposed to bring some much-needed juice to the Buffalo pass rush. Bosa recorded 5 sacks for the Bills in 2025, but tallied only 1 sack in the second half of the regular season and was completely blanked during Buffalo's postseason run. So the big splash signing kind of fizzled out when it mattered most. And now? Now the man might just be retired without ever officially saying so. ESPN's Adam Schefter dropped a bombshell on his podcast, stating plainly that it is more likely than not that Joey Bosa has played his last NFL down. CBSSports.com. That is not some random beat reporter speculating. That is Adam Schefter. The guy who breaks news before the players themselves sometimes even know. When Schefter says something like that, you listen. The numbers tell the story of why teams are hesitant. Bosa has earned over $156 million in his NFL career, including a $12.6 million deal with the Bills last season. He is not going to come cheap just because he is sitting on the market. And the dream scenario that everybody kept floating, the idea of Joey joining brother Nick in San Francisco for a Bosa Brothers defensive end partnership that would have been absolutely terrifying for NFL offensive tackles everywhere. 49ers general manager John Lynch admitted money was a roadblock, saying, "I know Mama Bosa would love that, but I don't know if we can afford him." The big duel. Even the most romantic football storyline of the offseason died because of a budget spreadsheet. Meanwhile, Nick Bosa revealed that his brother has been working on his golf game and has not shown a huge interest in football amid OTAs and minicamps. Joey Bosa might literally be teeing off right now while the rest of the NFL is sweating through summer practices. And honestly, after $156 million and a body that has been through the wars, can you blame him? Bosa will finish his NFL career, if this is truly the end, with 372 total tackles, 77 sacks, 22 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, and 5 passes deflected. That is a haul of very good career at minimum. Before his professional career, Bosa was a dominant force at Ohio State, where he played 3 seasons and won a national championship in 2014, earning Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year honors. The man played this game at the highest level and played it well for a long time. If the golf course is calling, maybe that is just the universe telling Joey Bosa it is time to enjoy the fruits of what he built. But here is the thing. Joey Bosa being unsigned or potentially retired is dramatic and headline-grabbing, but he is just one of 14 players in this situation, And when you zoom out and look at the full picture, the story gets genuinely uncomfortable for Bills fans. Let's talk about Matt Milano. The 32-year-old linebacker who, when healthy, is genuinely one of the better linebackers in football at covering tight ends and triggering downhill to make plays. The problem has always been staying healthy, and that problem did not go away last season. He played 50% of the Bills' snaps. For a guy who is one of your better players, that is a limited role. Milano is athletically capable of handling a linebacker role in a new defensive scheme, but it remains unknown where any team's level of interest stands for the 2017 fifth-round pick. The Bengals have a need at linebacker. The Ravens have a need at linebacker. The Jaguars have a need at linebacker, and yet there has been essentially no real reported interest in Matt Milano from anyone. The injuries are real, the age is real, and the market is saying what it always says when it goes quiet. We are not convinced. And then there is Shaq Thompson. 32 years old, played 43% of the snaps last year, and by some measures was arguably the Bills' best linebacker during the 2025 season when he was actually on the field. Thompson was versatile enough to make the transition to a 3-4 front and should be a candidate to return somewhere, although he is looking to maximize his salary. Here is where things get real about Thompson specifically. There were reports coming out of last season that the Bills got him at a discount because of his injury history. Thompson came back, proved he could still go, and now he wants to be paid accordingly. That is completely reasonable from his perspective, but the rest of the NFL is looking at a 32-year-old linebacker with an extensive injury history who wants to be paid market rate and collectively shrugging. Value is what somebody is willing to pay you. You can have all the conviction in the world about what you are worth. The market has the final say. Tre'Davious White is the one that might shock you the most. This is a guy who started 16 games last year, was arguably having a bounce-back season, finished with an interception along with a team-high 10 passes defensed, and was solid throughout. He is 31 years old at cornerback, which admittedly is late-stage territory for the position. And he was McDermott's very first draft pick in Buffalo, which means there was always going to be some sentimental value keeping him in Western New York. But now McDermott is gone. The new regime has different priorities, and Tre'Davious White is sitting on the market waiting for a phone call. Teams want to see what their young guys can do before they reach for a veteran. That is the cold reality. White is looking for starter snaps after his performance in 2025, and rightfully so. But it is unlikely he will find a landing spot until after the draft, when a team may be desperate after missing out on their targets. Now let's talk about Daquan Jones. 35 years old. You read that correctly. 35. The man is playing defensive tackle at 35 years old, which is extraordinary when you think about what that position demands physically. He played 43% of the snaps last year and was by most accounts a perfectly functional player in a limited role. Jones doesn't appear to be in the plans for a new defensive coordinator scheme change, and thus far no one has been willing to kick the tires on what would be his 13th NFL season. 13 NFL seasons as a defensive tackle. If he plays again, someone needs to give this man a statue somewhere. But the reality is that 35 is 35, and the NFL does not do sentimentality. Larry Ogunjobi had a genuinely rough year in Buffalo. The 6-game suspension before he ever played a snap set a tone that he'd never fully recovered from. He played just 22% of the snaps. For a guy who had been a quality interior defensive lineman for years before arriving in Buffalo, it was a frustrating and forgettable chapter. Teams are going to look at the Bills film and say the results were not good. What they might not consider is the context behind those results. The Browns, the Raiders, the Giants have been mentioned as potential destinations. But so far, nothing Taylor Rapp is a player that most people actually forgot was on this team until reminded. He played 35% of the snaps before ending up on injured reserve after just 6 games. Prior to that 2025 stretch, the greater body of his career told a decent story as a safety. The 6 games he put on tape last year were genuinely difficult to watch, but you have to weigh that against the injury that clearly impacted him. The Colts, Raiders, and Eagles all have the type of roster situations where a depth safety with NFL experience could get a look. Whether any of them are calling is the question. Curtis Samuel. Oh boy, Curtis Samuel. 30 years old and played 13% of the snaps. 13%. The reason is obvious. If you have watched him at any point in the last 2+ seasons, the man cannot stay healthy. And the brutal truth about receivers who cannot stay healthy is that offenses move on without them. The chemistry builds around other players. The routes and concepts get designed for people who are actually on the field. When you come back from injury as a receiver, you are not just getting healthy. You are trying to re-establish relevance in a system that forgot you existed. Curtis Samuel can make plays. He has made plays. But can you bet on him to be available to make plays? That question has been answered repeatedly, and the answer has not been encouraging. The Raiders, Saints, Commanders, Giants, and Cowboys have been floated as potential landing spots, but nobody is rushing to the phone. Brandin Cooks is the one that might actually get a deal done somewhere meaningful, because he is 33 years old and still showed something when he arrived in Buffalo late last season. He was arguably the best vertical separator on that Bills offense last year. The guy can still threaten a defense downfield. If you sat down and watched the film on him with a fresh set of eyes, you would come away thinking there is something left in the tank. The problem is that 33-year-old receivers who have been bouncing around get measured against what teams already have and what they are hoping to develop in younger players. Most teams at this stage of the offseason are not itching to add a 33-year-old receiver, but for a team in win-now mode that needs a legitimate vertical threat off the bench, Brandin Cooks could help somebody. The Bills themselves have even been mentioned as a team that could potentially bring him back, which would be the full-circle reunion nobody really expected. Matt Prater, the 42-year-old kicker who stepped in last year when Tyler Bass's struggles became untenable and was actually quite good. Over 90% of field goals made. Clutch kicks and clutch moments. The man is 42 years old and is still reliable enough to make over 90% of his field goals. At 42. While most of us are getting winded walking upstairs, the reason he is not signed is simple. Teams want the leg, the boom, the range, and the future. Matt Prater gives you dependability, but not the big bomb from 50+ yards with any consistency. He is very much a wait-and-see option for a team that runs into a kicker crisis during training camp. Jordan Poyer is a player who clearly meant everything to that Bills defense for years. His leadership, his communication, his ability to organize a secondary and set the tone on game day, those things are genuinely hard to replace. He played 44% of the snaps last year. But here is the honest assessment. His time as a playmaking safety in this league has likely passed. He can be a voice. He can be a leader. He can help a young defense find its identity. Whether an NFL team needs that specific contribution from an aging safety badly enough to put him on the roster is a different question. Jordan Phillips is 34, played 19% of the snaps, and made clear publicly that he did not want to play anywhere but Buffalo. The entire coaching staff that he said that to is now gone. The new regime has different players and different priorities. And Phillips himself, for as electrifying as he can be on third down when he absolutely unlocks and becomes briefly one of the most unblockable players on the field, is an extremely limited player in every other dimension. Gabe Davis, at 27 years old, is in a genuinely unique situation because he is the youngest significant name on this list. The knee injury he suffered was severe, and the recovery road is long. But 27 is young enough that if he gets right and finds his way back onto a roster, there are productive years potentially still ahead of him. The goal is not 2026. The goal is getting healthy, finding a team in 2027, and rebuilding his market value from there. And finally, Baylon Spector, 28 years old, who has spent more time on the injury report than the field and whose primary connection to the Bills organization was a coaching staff that is no longer in Buffalo. With those connections severed, the motivation for any team to take a flyer on him has essentially evaporated. So when you step back and look at all 14 of these players together, what is the story the NFL is telling us? In a market that quickly dwindled, these names should be somewhat desirable in the second post-draft wave of free agency. The fact they are still available makes for a much friendlier contract scenario, yet they are still unsigned. The rest of the league is essentially telling Bills fans something they probably do not want to hear.